I was 54 years old when I realized that the greatest mistake a father can make is believing love alone is enough to protect his child. My name is Owen Mercer, and for more than 3 decades I worked as a bridge engineer, leaving home before sunrise and returning after dark so my family could have everything. I never did. My wife, Claire, had passed away when our daughter, Evelyn, was only 12. And from that day forward, every decision I made revolved around her future. I learned how to braid her hair before school, how to cheer at dance recitals without embarrassing her, how to cook meals that looked terrible but tasted good enough to make her laugh, and how to hide my own grief so she would never feel alone. Evelyn grew into a kind, intelligent woman who believed there was goodness in everyone, a quality she inherited from her mother. I admired that innocence even though I feared it would someday be used against her. After graduating from college with honors, she accepted a position at a prestigious investment company owned by the wealthy Langford family. She loved the work, and every evening she would call me, excitedly describing projects, co-workers, and dreams of buying a little house where we could both live once I retired. Then she met Adrian Langford, the owner's charming son. He was handsome, polished, and knew exactly what people wanted to hear. At first I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling that settled in my chest whenever he visited our home with expensive gifts and rehearsed smiles. He called me Dad before he had even earned the right to marry my daughter, and while Evelyn interpreted his confidence as kindness, I noticed how every compliment he gave carried an expectation in return. Still, I stayed quiet because I trusted my daughter's judgment more than my instincts. Their wedding was held in a luxurious vineyard surrounded by politicians, celebrities, and business executives. I sat in the front row remembering the little girl who used to hold my hand crossing the street, wondering how time had moved so quickly. For a while, life appeared perfect. They bought a beautiful estate, traveled the world, and welcomed a son named Noah into their lives. Watching Evelyn become a mother healed pieces of my heart. I didn't know we're still broken, but happiness built on lies never lasts. The first crack appeared when she stopped calling every evening. Then her voice became quieter, her laughter disappeared, and every visit ended with an excuse about Adrian working late or dealing with stressful business negotiations. One rainy afternoon, she arrived at my house wearing sunglasses despite the dark clouds overhead. When she removed them, I saw the fading bruise beneath her eye. She claimed she had slipped in the bathroom, but no father mistakes fear for clumsiness. Before I could ask another question, she hugged me tighter than she ever had and whispered that everything would be okay. I wanted to believe her, yet every instinct screamed that something terrible was happening behind the walls of that luxurious mansion. I hired an old friend, retired Detective Marcus Halle, to quietly look into Adrian's affairs. Within 2 weeks, Marcus returned with a folder thick enough to make my hands tremble. Adrian wasn't just cheating on Evelyn with multiple women. He was secretly transferring company funds into offshore accounts, gambling millions, bribing officials, and preparing divorce papers, designed to leave my daughter penniless while protecting his family's fortune. Even worse, Marcus had evidence that Adrian planned to declare Evelyn mentally unstable so he could gain full custody of Noah. I felt as though someone had poured ice into my veins. The man I had welcomed into my family wasn't merely dishonest. He was methodically destroying the life of the daughter I had spent decades protecting. I drove to confront Evelyn, but before I reached her neighborhood, my phone rang. It was the hospital. A trembling nurse asked if I was the father of Evelyn Mercer because she had been brought into the emergency room after what police described as a serious car accident. When I arrived, doctors explained that the brakes on her vehicle had completely failed while she was driving home. They called it an accident. But the moment I saw Adrian standing outside her hospital room pretending to cry while checking messages on his phone every few seconds, I knew in my heart that this was no accident. As I held my unconscious daughter's hand and listened to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, I made a silent promise that no matter how rich, powerful, or untouchable Adrian Langford believed he was, I would tear apart every lie he had built, expose every crime he had hidden, and make him experience the same helpless pain he had forced upon my family, even if it cost me everything I had left. The night Evelyn remained unconscious in the intensive care unit, I didn't leave her bedside for a single second. Every beep of the heart monitor reminded me of the little girl who used to run into my arms after school, and every time I looked at the bruises scattered across her body, my grief hardened into something colder and far more dangerous. Adrian Langford arrived every morning carrying flowers and speaking softly with the doctors, playing the role of the devastated husband so convincingly that even the nurses sympathized with him. But I watched him carefully. He never looked at Evelyn for more than a few seconds before glancing at his expensive watch or stepping into the hallway to answer private phone calls. He wasn't worried about losing his wife. He was worried about losing control. Marcus Halle continued digging into Adrian's business dealings while I stayed at the hospital, and 3 days later he handed me a flash drive that changed everything. Hidden financial records revealed Adrian had quietly moved millions of dollars through shell companies, forging signatures and laundering money using projects funded by his father's corporation. There were encrypted emails discussing the destruction of evidence, secret payments to government officials, and insurance documents showing that only 2 weeks before Evelyn's crash, Adrian had increased her life insurance policy to an astonishing $25 million, making himself the sole beneficiary. The timing was impossible to ignore. Marcus also obtained security footage from a private garage where Adrian's personal mechanic had been seen working on Evelyn's SUV the night before the accident. The mechanic disappeared the following morning and had not been seen since. It was becoming painfully clear that this wasn't simply an abusive marriage, it was a carefully planned murder disguised as mechanical failure. Before we could take the evidence to the authorities, Marcus warned me that several senior investigators had close ties to the Langford family. If we acted too soon, Adrian would be tipped off, the evidence would disappear, and Evelyn would never receive justice. For the first time in my life, I realized that following the rules would only protect the man who had destroyed my family. If I wanted to save my daughter and grandson, I needed to think several steps ahead. Then another blow landed. Adrian filed emergency paperwork claiming Evelyn had become mentally unstable before the accident and petitioned the court for temporary custody of Noah while she remained hospitalized. He portrayed himself as the caring father protecting his son from an emotionally fragile mother, watching him smile for television cameras outside the courthouse while describing himself as a devoted husband made my blood boil. Yet I remained silent because anger without strategy only benefits your enemy. I hired the best digital forensic experts my retirement savings could afford. Within days, they recovered deleted messages from Adrian's encrypted devices. Through cloud backups, Marcus had managed to access. The conversations were horrifying. Adrian wasn't acting alone. His cousin Vincent, the company's chief financial officer, had helped conceal the stolen money, while a ruthless attorney named Eleanor Briggs drafted false legal documents to strip Evelyn of every asset she owned. Worst of all, Adrian had exchanged messages with an unknown contact discussing how the break solved one problem, but that the father might become another. Reading those words sent a chill through my entire body. I wasn't just investigating a crime anymore, I had become part of their plan. That same evening, someone broke into my home. Nothing valuable was stolen. Instead, every family photograph had been smashed, and on the dining table sat a single chess king covered in red paint. There was no note because none was needed. It was a warning. They wanted me frightened enough to walk away. Instead, I carefully swept the broken glass into a box and kept every piece as a reminder of why I could never stop. Marcus arranged a safe house for Noah after discovering Adrian planned to move him overseas if the custody hearing succeeded. With the help of Evelyn's closest friend, pediatrician Dr. Sophie Bennett, we quietly removed Noah before Adrian could reach him. The little boy kept asking why his mother wasn't waking up, and every question felt like another knife twisting inside my chest. I promised him that his mom would come home soon, though I wasn't certain it was true. 2 nights later, while reviewing hospital surveillance footage, Marcus noticed something no one else had seen. A man wearing a maintenance uniform entered Evelyn's room after midnight, carrying no equipment, and remained inside for less than 2 minutes. Hospital records showed no maintenance request had ever been made for that floor. When security finally identified the man, they discovered the identification badge had been stolen weeks earlier. Doctors immediately examined Evelyn and found traces of an uncommon sedative in her bloodstream, a drug that had not been prescribed during her treatment. Someone had entered her room to make sure she never regained consciousness. As I stood outside the ICU, watching doctors fight once again to save my daughter's life, I realized Adrian was no longer trying to escape justice. He was desperately trying to erase the only witness who could destroy him, and I swore that before he reached Evelyn again, I would make certain his perfect empire collapsed piece by piece until he had nothing left to hide behind. The moment the doctors confirmed that someone had deliberately injected Evelyn with an unauthorized sedative, my patience disappeared completely. This was no longer about exposing a corrupt businessman or winning a custody battle. My daughter was lying in a hospital bed because someone wanted her dead, and every hour Adrian Langford remained free gave him another chance to finish what he had started. Marcus and I knew we couldn't trust the local authorities, so we began building a case that no amount of money or influence could bury. Every document, surveillance video, financial record, phone log, and witness statement was copied multiple times and stored in secure locations. If anything happened to either of us, the evidence would automatically be delivered to federal investigators and several national news organizations. Adrian believed he was playing chess while everyone else played checkers, but he had underestimated one thing about fathers: we don't stop fighting when we lose. We become impossible to intimidate when our children are threatened. Meanwhile, Noah was staying safely with Dr. Sophie Bennett and her husband on their countryside property. The little boy had stopped asking when his father was coming because, even at 6 years old, he had begun to understand that something was terribly wrong. Instead, he drew pictures of his mother smiling under a bright sun and handed them to me every time I visited. I tucked each drawing into my jacket pocket, carrying them like armor whenever the weight of everything threatened to crush me. A week later, the first crack appeared in Adrian's perfect circle. Marcus tracked down the missing mechanic, Daniel Cross, who had vanished after Evelyn's accident. Daniel wasn't hiding because he was guilty. He was hiding because he was terrified. After hours of reassurance, he finally admitted the truth. Adrian had paid him an enormous amount of money to disable Evelyn's braking system, claiming it was part of an insurance scam and insisting no one would actually be hurt because the vehicle would never be driven. When Daniel learned about the crash on the news, he realized he had been manipulated into becoming an accomplice to attempted murder. Adrian's security team had threatened his family, forcing him into hiding. Daniel agreed to testify, but only if we guaranteed protection for his wife and daughter. It was the first living witness who could directly connect Adrian to the attack. Then Marcus uncovered something even bigger. Adrian's father, Charles Langford, had no idea what his son had become. Although ruthless in business, Charles had built a company over 40 years and valued its reputation above everything else. Adrian had secretly forged his father's signature on dozens of financial documents, using the family empire to hide millions in stolen funds. We arranged an anonymous meeting with Charles, expecting him to deny everything. Instead, the aging businessman spent nearly 3 hours reviewing the evidence in silence. By the time he reached the final document, his hands were shaking. Without saying a word, he opened the private safe in his office and handed me decades of confidential corporate records. "If my son has done this," he said quietly, "he deserves whatever comes." Next, those records revealed the final piece of Adrian's scheme. He wasn't simply planning to inherit Evelyn's insurance money. He intended to blame the missing millions on her, forged digital evidence suggesting she had embezzled company funds, and let her reputation take the fall after her death, while he escaped with both the money and public sympathy. The cruelty of the plan stunned even Marcus. who had spent 30 years investigating violent criminals. Before we could move forward, disaster struck again. Our safe house was compromised. Someone had followed me after I visited Noah. By the time Marcus arrived, armed men had already entered the property. Fortunately, Sophie had noticed unfamiliar vehicles circling the area earlier that morning and evacuated Noah through a hidden service road before the attackers arrived. They found an empty house. Furious, they destroyed everything inside before disappearing without a trace. Standing in the wreckage, looking at broken furniture and shattered family photographs, I realized Adrian's desperation was growing. Dangerous people make mistakes when they panic, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I believed his downfall had finally begun. That belief was confirmed 48 hours later when Evelyn unexpectedly opened her eyes. She was weak, confused, and barely able to speak, but when she saw me beside her bed, tears rolled down her cheeks. I squeezed her hand and told her she was safe. She struggled for several moments before whispering 5 words that froze every person in the room. Adrian cut my break. Lines. Those words weren't just a memory, they were the testimony of a survivor. In that instant, everything changed. Adrian Langford no longer had a helpless victim lying silently in a hospital bed. He had awakened the one person who could expose every lie he had built, and I knew the revenge I had promised beside. Evelyn's hospital bed was finally about to begin. The moment Evelyn identified Adrian as the man who had cut her brake lines, I felt the burden I had been carrying for weeks begin to shift. She was still weak, barely able to sit upright without assistance, but her memory was clear. Over the next several days, federal investigators interviewed her in secret while Marcus ensured that no information leaked to anyone connected to the Langford family. Evelyn described the months of emotional abuse, the threats, Adrian's obsession with money, and the night before the crash when she had walked into the garage and seen him crouched beside her SUV. When he noticed her, he calmly closed the hood and smiled, claiming he was checking the windshield washer fluid. She had believed him then. Now she understood that she had witnessed the beginning of his murder attempt. Her testimony matched Daniel Cross's confession perfectly, and together they formed a chain of evidence that could no longer be dismissed. Meanwhile, Charles Langford quietly removed Adrian's access to several company accounts, pretending it was part of an internal audit so his son wouldn't become suspicious. Adrian responded exactly as we expected. Believing his father had begun asking questions, he secretly started transferring the remaining stolen money into overseas accounts. He didn't realize every transaction was now being monitored. Instead of stopping him, investigators allowed the transfers to continue, documenting every move. The more desperate Adrian became, the deeper he buried himself. Within days, Vincent tried deleting company servers. Eleanor Briggs shredded legal files, and several executives suddenly resigned. They thought they were erasing evidence, but digital forensic teams recovered nearly everything. Every deleted email, every hidden contract, every encrypted message only strengthened the case against them. Still, I wasn't satisfied. Prison alone wasn't enough. Adrian had spent years humiliating Evelyn, convincing the world she was unstable while presenting himself as the perfect husband. I wanted the truth revealed in the same public spotlight he had always craved. That opportunity arrived when the Langford Foundation announced its annual charity gala, an event attended by business leaders, politicians, journalists, and television networks from across the country. Adrian insisted on hosting the evening himself, hoping to reassure investors that the recent financial rumors were meaningless. He had no idea that nearly every person investigating him would be sitting in that ballroom. I attended wearing the same old suit I had worn at Evelyn's wedding, walking through the grand entrance with Marcus at my side. Adrian spotted me almost immediately. He approached with that familiar, polished smile and offered fake condolences for everything my family had endured, speaking loudly enough for nearby guests to admire his compassion. Before I could answer, Charles stepped onto the stage to begin the ceremony. Instead of welcoming the audience, he looked directly at his son and announced that an internal investigation had uncovered years of fraud. money laundering, forgery, and attempted murder committed by senior members of the company. The ballroom fell completely silent. Giant screens behind the stage suddenly displayed financial records, surveillance footage, security videos from the hospital, Daniel's sworn testimony, and copies of Adrian's encrypted messages discussing the break, failure, and plans to frame Evelyn after her death. Gasps echoed through the crowd as journalists rushed to record every second. Adrian's confident smile disappeared for the first time since I had met him. He tried blaming Vincent, then Eleanor, then Daniel, claiming they had conspired against him. But each lie collapsed within seconds as another piece of evidence appeared on the screens. When investigators entered through the ballroom doors, Adrian panicked and attempted to escape through the service corridor. He never made it outside. Federal agents arrested him before he reached the parking garage, while Vincent and Eleanor were taken into custody at the same moment in separate locations. Television cameras captured everything. The man who had spent years building the image of a respected businessman left the gala in handcuffs, surrounded by flashing lights and reporters, shouting questions he could no longer avoid. As I watched the convoy drive away, I expected to feel satisfaction, but instead I felt something quieter. Revenge had never really been about watching Adrian fall. It had always been about giving my daughter the chance to stand again without fear. 2 weeks later, Evelyn walked out of the rehabilitation center holding Noah's hand. She still carried scars, both physical and emotional, yet there was strength in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. She looked at me, smiled through tears, and thanked me for never giving up on her even when she had nearly lost hope herself. At that moment, I realized my revenge was almost complete, not because Adrian had lost everything, but because the family he tried so hard to destroy was finally whole again. There was only one final chapter left to write, and it would ensure that every victim of Adrian Langford's greed received justice for years to come. The months following Adrian Langford's arrest proved that justice does not arrive all at once. It comes one decision at a time, one truth at a time, until every lie finally collapses under its own weight. His criminal trial became national news, and for nearly 8 weeks, the courtroom remained packed with reporters, victims, and former employees who had spent years living in fear of the Langford empire. One by one, witnesses stepped forward. Daniel Cross admitted his role in disabling Evelyn's breaks and accepted responsibility for his actions, but his testimony also exposed how Adrian had manipulated and threatened innocent people into doing his dirty work. Former accountants revealed the hidden accounts. Investigators presented the recovered digital evidence, and Charles Langford, with tears in his eyes, testified against his own son. It was the hardest decision of his life, but he refused to let the family name become a shield for evil. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Evelyn entered the courtroom with a slight limp, holding my arm as we walked to the witness stand. The room became completely silent. She described the years of emotional abuse, the constant manipulation, the fear she had hidden behind forced smiles, and the afternoon she saw Adrian kneeling beside her SUV before pretending nothing was wrong. She spoke with calm determination, refusing to let anger control her words. When the prosecutor played Adrian's own encrypted messages, discussing the break, failure, and his plan to frame Evelyn for financial crimes after her death, there was no explanation left for the defense to invent. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before, returning guilty verdicts on attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, money laundering, witness intimidation, and multiple financial crimes. Adrian was sentenced to decades in federal prison, without the possibility of early release, while Vincent and Eleanor received lengthy sentences for their roles in the conspiracy. As the judge finished reading the verdict, Adrian turned toward Evelyn for what was probably the last time. He expected to see hatred in her eyes. Instead, she simply looked at him with quiet indifference before taking Noah's hand and walking out of the courtroom. That hurt him more than any angry words ever could. Outside, cameras surrounded us, asking whether I finally felt victorious. I answered honestly, there were no winners. My daughter still carried scars, Noah had lost the father he thought he knew. Charles had watched his own son destroy everything the family had built, and Claire would never return to see the strength our daughter had found. Revenge had never brought my family back to the life we once had. What it gave us was the opportunity to build a better one. Over the following year, the Langford Corporation was restructured under new leadership, and much of the recovered money was returned to employees, investors, and charitable organizations that had been cheated for years. Charles officially retired and dedicated the remainder of his life to supporting victims of domestic abuse, admitting publicly that wealth had blinded him to the darkness growing inside his own family. Evelyn never returned to corporate finance. Instead, she founded a nonprofit organization providing legal and financial assistance to survivors trapped in abusive relationships, determined to help others escape before it was too late. Watching her transform unimaginable pain into hope for thousands of strangers became the proudest moment of my life. Noah slowly rediscovered his childhood. The nightmares became less frequent, his laughter returned, and every Saturday morning we resumed our old tradition of fishing at the quiet lake where Claire had once taught him to skip stones across the water. Those peaceful mornings reminded me that healing doesn't happen through revenge alone. It happens through love that refuses to disappear, no matter how much darkness tries to extinguish it. On the second anniversary of Evelyn's accident, the three of us visited Claire's grave carrying fresh white lilac. We stood together in silence before Evelyn knelt and whispered that she had finally found peace. As we turned to leave, Noah slipped his small hand into mine exactly the way his mother used to when she was a little girl. In that single moment, I understood what my journey had truly been about. I hadn't fought to destroy Adrian Langford. I had fought to protect the people who still depended on me, just as I had promised Claire I always would. Revenge had been the road, but family had always been the destination. As we walked away beneath the warm evening sun, leaving the past where it belonged, I realized that the greatest victory a father can ever achieve is not watching his enemy fall, it is seeing his child smile again, knowing that no amount of cruelty, power, or betrayal was ever strong enough to break the bond between a father and the family he would protect until his very last breath.